When I moved into my new home, I thought I was making a smart investment in my future. I was starting my PhD, and my dad and I figured that buying a house instead of renting would pay off in the long run. It was a small town, the kind where everyone knew each other, and the bar down the street was a local staple. My dad befriended the regulars and was reassured that I was in good hands, especially since my next-door neighbor was the nicest guy you could ever meet. At first, he did seem nice. Friendly, even. He suggested we exchange numbers in case I ever needed anything, and that sounded reasonable. Then, the day my dad left, everything changed. It started with gifts, small things left on my porch. A hand-painted feeding dish for my cats, a fishing invitation, little trinkets. But there was something off about the way he spoke to me. The texts were constant, and he started calling me pet names, sweetie, cutie. I quickly made it clear that I wasn't interested in anything romantic. He insisted he just wanted to be friends. But his version of friendship was invasive. He knew when I came home. He knew when I left. His texts would confirm it. Saw you get home safe. Just thinking about you. I tried to brush it off, to remain polite but distant. I didn't want to escalate things. I didn't want to make an enemy of my neighbor. Then, one night, I got a message from the manager of the bar down the street. If your neighbor knocks on your door, don't answer. She told me he had shown up at the bar wielding a hatchet, hearing voices that grew louder as he approached. He threatened to unalive someone if the voices didn't stop. The police were called, but they only confiscated the weapon. No arrest. No real consequences. That's when the fear started creeping in. One morning, I found a dead squirrel in my driveway, positioned directly in front of my car door. Hours later, it was gone. Then a text came in. Someone or something put a dead squirrel in your driveway. Don't worry, I moved it for you. There was also the shotgun shell he placed on the bricks in his front yard. A warning, he told me. A warning for who? Then came the casket. He built it himself, large and imposing, with the words, "Here lies the last son of a bitch who played mind games." November 2012. At that point, I stopped replying to his texts. I ignored him completely. 2 weeks later, he responded in kind by throwing a 50-pound concrete flower pot at my front door. That's when I went to the police. They advised me to file for a stalking no-contact order. Days later, my security system alerted me that someone had attempted to break in while I was out of town. Then, he tried to cast a video to my TV. It wasn't until I stood in front of a judge, listing every disturbing incident, that I got the protection order. He didn't even deny it. He just told the judge he was trying to turn over a new leaf. For a while, things settled. He was still strange, but at least he wasn't dangerous. That is, until he relapsed. First, another shotgun shell, this time in my flower bed. Then, a night of screaming at my bedroom window, obscenities and threats spilling out of his mouth. When I called the police, they shrugged. There's nothing illegal about yelling in your own house. I stopped parking in my driveway. I kept my curtains shut. I spent over $1,000 on security cameras, making sure every inch of my yard was covered. I had to live my life with my back against the wall, always watching, always waiting. Then, last week, someone is going to die over this sweatshirt. I turned on the cameras to see him pacing the alley behind my house, screaming, "How about I get my shotgun?" I called the police again. Disturbing the peace, they said. Nothing more. And now, as I sit here writing this, he's outside, sawing his own privacy fence in half. It used to be the only thing that gave me some sense of security, the one thing separating my yard from his. Now it's nothing but a 3-foot-high joke. I'm exhausted. I just want to live in a house where I don't have to wonder if my neighbor will try to unalive me. But I'm trapped. I'm a PhD student, barely scraping by, trying to save up for a new home. I have my pets, my partner, my life. And until I can leave, all I can do is wait and hope he doesn't escalate again. When my husband and I moved into our new house 9 months ago, we thought we found the perfect spot. It wasn't a dream home, but it was ours. Quiet neighborhood, friendly enough neighbors, the kind that wave but don't linger to chat. Perfect for us. Across the street lived a woman we'll call Lucy. She seemed normal at first, the kind of neighbor you barely notice. On Mother's Day, as my husband and I were leaving for brunch, she waved and wished me a happy Mother's Day. I returned the greeting. She started walking towards our driveway, but we were in a rush. I didn't want to be rude, so I rolled down the window and told her we'd chat when we got back. That's when everything changed. Her face twisted into something unrecognizable, like a mask tearing apart. She started screaming, waving her arms wildly, hurling curses at us as we drove away. My husband and I looked at each other, confused. When we got home later that afternoon, 3 of the 4 planters outside our front door were knocked over. Dirt was everywhere, broken ceramic scattered across the walkway. As we got out of the car, Lucy appeared again, this time standing at the edge of her driveway, watching us. She didn't say a word, just stared. We decided to clean everything up and bought new planters, along with 6 Wi-Fi security cameras to cover the house from every angle. The next time we pulled into the driveway, Lucy ran out again, dragging a chair this time. She planted herself at the end of her driveway, sitting there like she was watching a live show. As we worked, a neighbor walked over, quiet and cautious. He told us Lucy had a reputation. He said the landlord should have warned us. Sometimes she does things like this when she feels slighted. We thanked him and finished setting up the cameras. Lucy eventually disappeared back into her house. The next morning, as we pulled out for work, she ran outside again, barefoot, wrapped in a nightgown, arms folded tight across her chest, just watching. That night, the planters had been moved again, not knocked over this time, but shifted. We checked the cameras. 2 little girls, maybe 6 and 8, wandered from Lucy's house. They tried to push the planters over, but couldn't. When they gave up, they ran back to Lucy's house. We called the police to file a report. It felt paranoid, but something told me this wasn't over. For the next 2 months, every time the cameras picked up motion, Lucy would appear. Like clockwork. She wasn't even pretending to hide it. Then came the driveway incident. We got home from work to find her car parked directly across our driveway, blocking us in. We called the police. They made her move it, but didn't do anything else. They told us to keep records of her behavior. A week later, it happened again. This time they gave her a ticket. I thought that might stop her, but it only seemed to make her worse. She started waiting for us. She'd pull up right before we did, park at the end of the street, and wait in her car. The second we got out, she did too. It didn't matter what time we came home. She was always there. We tried using a different entrance to the neighborhood. That worked for about a week. Then she figured it out. One night, she was parked outside the new entrance, following us back in. I started recording everything on my phone. Every single time. Then came the trailer. I went home for lunch one day and found a massive trailer blocking our driveway. I asked the driver to move it. He smirked and said, "My buddy's visiting Lucy." I told him to move or I'd call the police. He did, but moved it right back as soon as I parked. So I called. Again, the cops came, ticketed the trailer, and made the driver leave. I also called the number on the side of the trailer. The owner apologized, said the driver shouldn't have been there. Turned out, Lucy's visitor had warrants for criminal trespassing. They arrested him on the spot. A week later, she ambushed us again. We barely pulled into the subdivision before she came flying out of her driveway, parked, and ran to the edge of ours. She screamed about the trucking company, said we were stupid for reporting them. I held my phone up, recording the whole thing. She saw it and backed off. We called the police. Again, another report, another warning. She ranted about how we didn't own the house, how she could walk wherever she wanted on our property. The officer warned her again. Next time would mean an arrest. A week later, a group of kids showed up. They swarmed our front lawn, screaming, fighting, throwing trash everywhere. Lucy sat on her porch, cheering them on. She egged them on like it was a backyard wrestling match. We called the police. Again, the officer shrugged it off. "They're just kids messing around," he said. We showed him the video. He still wouldn't do anything. He gave Lucy another useless warning. The next day, Lucy took it to a new level. It was freezing, 40 degrees, and she stood barefoot in the middle of the street, staring at our house. She didn't move. She didn't blink. Just watched. She's done it every day since. Morning and night. We have 3 months left on our lease. We're counting the days. The police won't help. They never really did. So, we'll keep the cameras rolling, keep the records, and keep calling. Even though it's clear Lucy isn't afraid of the law. We just want to feel safe again. We just want to get out. And until then, Lucy keeps watching. There's something unsettling about living in a house that feels like it has secrets it's trying to keep hidden. It was around 10 to 12 years ago when I lived in a small, two-bedroom terraced house in England, nestled among rows of other similar homes. The kind of house that looked charming at first glance, but had an underlying darkness to it that only revealed itself slowly. It was one of those old homes where the attics weren't sealed off, each one connected to the next. In theory, you could travel from house to house through the attics. They later realized how dangerous that was. Fires, burglars, who knows what else could slip from one house to the next. So, years later, they bricked them up, each house's attic becoming its own sealed-off space. At first, everything seemed perfectly fine. I moved in, settling in quickly, getting familiar with the creaks and groans of an old house. But then came the noises. I was in the bath one evening, letting the warm water soothe my mind after a long day. As I sunk deeper into the tub, I heard it. A faint scratching, like the rustling of something moving around above me. I chalked it up to an animal. Maybe a squirrel or a bird, I thought. Nothing unusual. After all, it was an old house, and animals had a habit of getting into the rafters. But the noise didn't stop. It continued for days, even weeks. And it always seemed to happen when I was in the bath or shower. That odd, creeping sensation slowly began to creep into my thoughts. Why did it only happen when I was alone and vulnerable? I brushed it off, convincing myself it was just an animal again. Nothing to be worried about. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. One day, I had a friend check the attic, just to make sure nothing was lurking up there. He stuck his head inside, didn't see anything, and assured me it was just my imagination. I convinced myself that was the case, too. Maybe it was just a rat or some other creature. I had to believe that. Weeks passed. The strange noises continued, but I pushed it all to the back of my mind. Until one night, it happened again. I was getting ready to take a shower, my mind already thinking about meeting friends, when I heard it. That unmistakable scratching above me. But this time, something was different. My dog, who was usually calm, started barking furiously. His eyes were wide, his tail straight, and he was staring directly above me. His behavior was frantic, and it made my skin crawl. It felt like something was wrong, something far more sinister than a simple animal in the attic. I quickly decided to leave. My nerves were shot, and I knew I wouldn't feel safe in that house any longer. I called my friend, explaining what had happened, and told them I'd be coming over to get ready at their house instead. The next day, when I was outside, trying to shake off the unease, my neighbor called me over. Now, this man, he wasn't exactly the friendly sort. In fact, he creeped me out from the moment I moved in. He was small, scraggly looking, with a strange stench always clinging to him. His eyes had a wild, unsettling gleam, the kind of person you'd avoid if you could. He asked if I was okay. I politely said yes, trying to avoid too much interaction, but before I could get inside, he asked, "Did you get to your friend's okay?" I froze. How would he know I was going to my friend's house? I hadn't told him, and I hadn't even mentioned it on the phone. In fact, I was practically whispering when I called. I tried to brush it off, giving him a forced smile and quickly walking inside. But then, as I stood there in the safety of my home, it hit me. How could he possibly know about my phone call unless he'd heard me? The thought made my stomach churn. I couldn't ignore it any longer. Something was wrong, and I needed answers. I called my family. My dad, my cousin, they all came over immediately. When they arrived, we started to investigate. My dad was the first to walk into the bathroom. He turned on the lights, but left the rest of the house dark. As the lights flickered on, something caught our attention. Two small, pinpoint holes were visible in the ceiling, right above where the bath was. Tiny beams of light shone through from the attic. It was then that I realized I had never noticed them before. My bathroom had always been dim, but these holes were right there, hidden in plain sight. Dad didn't waste any time. He marched straight up into the attic. Time dragged on as we waited. When he came back down, his face was red with anger, his fists clenched. He refused to speak to us at first, ignoring our questions as he walked straight outside to the neighbor's house. We heard shouting moments later. My dad was at the door, demanding the neighbor open up. But no one answered. It was a tense, eerie moment as we realized just how much trouble this situation could bring. At that point, I asked my cousin to check the attic. When he returned, his face was pale, his voice trembling. "The wall between the attics has been knocked through," he said, his eyes wide with disbelief. "It's been done from the other side, and most of the brickwork is on your side." My heart sank. The reality hit hard. The neighbor had been sneaking into my attic, watching me. And those holes, they weren't some accident. Someone had been spying on me through them. We immediately called the police. But when they arrived, they told us there was nothing they could do. No evidence, no proof. The neighbor denied using the attic, claiming that the previous tenants might have been responsible. But we all knew the truth. The dirty, disgusting man had been watching me for weeks, maybe longer. That was the final straw. I couldn't stay in that house anymore. The thought that someone had been watching me all that time, when I was vulnerable, alone, it shattered my sense of safety. I never went back to that house, and I never will. Thanks for joining me on this journey through the strange and unexpected. If you enjoyed the story, hit that like button, share with fellow curious minds, and don't forget to subscribe for more. Until next time, stay curious, stay intrigued,